Hello everyone! Welcome to the first of the new Out Chasing Stars video series. We've documented each step of our sail around the world here on YouTube, and now it's time to get a bit more in depth on the cruising lifestyle. What better way to get started than go over a quick summary and hit the highlights of our circumnavigation. So sit back, relax, and let's talk boats. To start off, let's cover a few quick housekeeping items. It's my intention to release videos about every other week. We're going to be trying this new format and giving it a trial run. And while I'm really excited to share the things we've got planned with you, I don't want to get anywhere close to the burnout I felt when I finished up our last few sailing episodes. So for this video, I'm going to do a fairly high level overview of our circumnavigation. There will be time codes down in the description below, so if you're interested in one topic in particular, you can go check that one out. I do think there will be some interesting information throughout the video though, so hopefully you'll stick with me through the whole thing. I'm also still contemplating which, if any of these topics, I can go do a bit more in depth in another video. So if there's a topic you want to hear more about, let me know in the comments below. All right, enough housekeeping. Let's get started. I do think it's important that we're all working from the same definition of a circumnavigation. So there are 4 qualifications. First, you must start and end at the same port. Second, you must cross all meridians of longitude. Third, you must cross the equator. And fourth, you must travel at least 21,600 nautical miles. That is a lot. So all that means that our circumnavigation started and ended in Antigua in the Caribbean. The year it took and the 10,000 nautical miles that we sailed from France to Florida and then up to Canada, then back down to the Caribbean, that doesn't count. Now that we're all on the same page, let's talk about the route we sailed. We left Antigua on December 30th, 2015, in what would be the official start of our circumnavigation, although we didn't know that at the time. In 2016, the year started in Guadeloupe, before we hopped our way down to Grenada in the Caribbean. Then came the crossing to Panama, where we transited the Panama Canal and set off across the Pacific. We spent 3 months in French Polynesia before sailing to Niue, Tonga, and Fiji. We ended the year in New Zealand for cyclone season. A lot of miles covered that year. In 2017, we began the year in New Zealand while we waited out cyclone season. It had been our intention to continue sailing west, but we decided that we loved the South Pacific so much that it was worth extending our trip by a year so that we could go back. So we did, sailing up to Tonga, returning to Fiji, and then sailing to Vanuatu and New Caledonia before we went to Australia for cyclone season this time. In 2018, we spent New Year's Eve in Sydney, and then began working our way up the coast, eastern coast of Australia. We didn't leave the country until July, so that was over 6 months of exploring, including 6 weeks of flying and road trips around the country. After Australia, we joined the wonderful Sail to Indonesia rally and spent 100 days cruising Indonesia. Then we stopped in Singapore and Malaysia, which was mostly Langkawi, before we finished the year in Thailand. 2019 now. We left Thailand to sail across the Indian Ocean. First stop was Sri Lanka, and then we island hopped through the Maldives, Chagos, and Seychelles. We then got stuck in Seychelles waiting for weather, which admittedly was not a huge hardship, and arrived in Madagascar in early October. That November, we crossed the Mozambique Channel to South Africa and hopped along the coast. Made it to Cape Town by the end of the year. 2020 was definitely our year of long passages. It was a 12-day passage from Cape Town to St. Helena, then another 12 days from St. Helena to Recife, Brazil, and then 15 days up to Antigua, where we crossed our wake on March 26th. I will save y'all trying to do the math a little bit of hassle. From December 30th, 2016 to March 26th, 2020, that's 4 years and 3 months, or 1,547 days. I think that's the math in total. So that, not quite as long as you might think, but for comparison, the World Arc route does it in 18 months. And we've also known people who have taken like 15 years to sail around the world. Clearly there's no one way to do it, but we think our time frame worked out pretty well. We wanted to have a nice balance between having the time to see and explore the places we visited, but not spending so long that we got burned out by the boating life before we accomplished our goal to sail around the world. And make no mistake, the boating life is a hard one, and burnout's a real concern. You would think that for a sailing circumnavigation that you would spend the majority of your time sailing, but you would definitely be mistaken. We've got a bit of a chart breakdown over here showing exactly how many nights we spent in each place. Nights spent at anchor was by far the most common at 745 nights, or a bit over 48% of our total time. We spent our times in a dock in a marina, the second most common. That was 292 nights, or almost 19% of our total time. I do want to note that this mix can vary quite significantly depending on which part of the world you're in. Over 60% of our time in marinas came in 2019, as we stayed in marinas for a long time in the Seychelles, and as we made our way around South Africa. However, in 2017, the cruising season, we didn't spend a single night at the dock. For the actual sailing part of our circumnavigation, we only spent 199 nights at sea in order to sail all the way around the world. That's only 12.86% of our total nights. That's not much at all. I'm going to add a bit of a side note here. This is why I never understood the Condamaran insult. We chose a boat. Starry Horizons can sail decently well, but she's very comfortable to live on because that's what we spent most of our time doing, living on the boat. Anyways, it's something worth considering when you're contemplating kind of where you fall on the sailing to living ratio. One of the most common questions we or any other YouTuber, blogger, person living on a boat gets asked is about the costs of the cruising life. So let's talk about it. The honest truth is that the overall costs are going to vary incredibly wildly. Things like health insurance, food, travel, they're all 100% based on personal preference. In this lifestyle, you can eat out as much or as little as you want. You can travel home 3 times a year or not at all. You can take outside land-based trips or not. Healthcare costs are going to be very dependent on an individual's age and health. So what I will share with you here today is what we classify as our marine costs. That includes repair and maintenance, boat insurance, dockage, customs and immigration, gas and fuel, and communications. Now keep in mind, this is for a 44-foot catamaran. That means there's like 2 of several systems to repair and maintain, or we typically pay more for a marina and haul-outs. Also, as Americans, we kept track of everything in US dollars. So, what was our average yearly marine costs? $36,250. That adds up to $145,000 for our entire circumnavigation. Now, the biggest categories of our marine costs were by far the repairs and maintenance of Starry Horizons, which averaged around $16,000 per year. And boat insurance, that was next, which varied quite a bit depending on where we were in the world, but overall averaged about $9,000 per year. One other thing to consider is the loss you're likely to suffer on the depreciation of your boat. There are very few boats that hold their value over time, and even fewer that are going to increase in value. Now, buying a new boat will likely suffer a larger drop in value than buying used. We've got a more detailed blog post breaking out cruising costs from each year, and I'll link to it down in the description below. Now, during our circumnavigation, we visited 27 different countries and territories, but there are 3 in particular that really stood out. The first was French Polynesia. There's just something magical about these islands. From the Jurassic-looking Marquesas that appear on the horizons to mark the end of your Pacific crossing, the crystal clear blue water, white sand beaches, and palm trees of the Tuamotus, and finally, the combination of both in the societies like Bora Bora and Tahiti. This was the place we dreamed about before we set sail, and they didn't disappoint. The second, New Zealand. It's kind of the default place to go and escape the cyclone season in the South Pacific, which means you get a lot of time there. But fortunately, there is so much to see and do. It's very common to actually buy a car and get around in New Zealand, and it's well worth it. The cars are cheap. We spent 5 weeks on a road trip and still didn't see everything we wanted to see. There were amazing hikes, amazing views, incredibly friendly people, and you can even have dinner in Hobbiton. I mean, that was awesome. Plus, on the boat side, there were quite a lot of marine services available there, so you could actually get work done. Wasn't the cheapest in the world, but it was one of the few places that we were actually completely happy with the quality of the work. Now, the third place, finally, we have Tonga. Tonga was special for a lot of reasons, but the thing we remember most was the humpback whales. I mean, this is where we got to actually jump in the water and swim with humpbacks, including a calf that was, it was so excited to see us, it breached 3 times right in front of us. It was awesome. And we were also in one spot where we were the only humans. We got to witness the birth of a newborn calf. I mean, guys, just wow. It was so special. It was amazing. We absolutely loved it. Also, the Hapai group in Tonga, it's less commonly visited by cruisers because it's pretty remote and finding supplies it's a bit tougher. But if you're willing to make the effort, it is so worth it. The islands were gorgeous, the snorkeling was good, and we could hear the humpbacks singing through our holes at night. As you can tell, there is a bit of a theme here. The South Pacific, it's just such an amazing place. It was almost a bit of a bummer that we sailed there so early in our circumnavigation, because after we left, we were constantly comparing new places to it. Like, well, the snorkeling here is good, but it's not as good as it was in fill in the blank from your favorite place in the South Pacific. We were really glad that we took the time to do a second season in the South Pacific, but we still wish we had more time there. When we envisioned full-time cruising, we thought that the best part of the life would be the sailing, or all the beautiful beaches and clear water we knew we'd find. Now, don't get me wrong, those things are awesome. But let's talk about what was actually the best parts of sailing around the world. Sappy as it might sound, the absolute best part of this life is all the time you get to spend with your partner. It's true. Amy and I have always enjoyed being around each other and being able to share all the adventures and the experiences that you have while you're sailing. It just makes them all the more meaningful. You're going to learn a lot about yourself, but also your partner while you're sailing, and finding a way to make this life work will only make you a stronger team. You have to work so closely together. One of the other big things we didn't expect was just how awesome the cruising community is. The people that you meet and the stories they have about how they came to the lifestyle, they're fascinating. We're definitely on the younger side of the cruising spectrum, but age really doesn't seem to matter. Everyone's living on boats and experiencing the life together, sharing stories, offering advice, or even help. If you're struggling with a project, host a gathering on your boat. And before you know it, someone will be down in the engine room with you trying to diagnose a lack of water flow while, everyone else is drinking cocktails. And yeah, that really happened. Now, I mentioned earlier that we were looking forward to the beautiful beaches, and we certainly saw a lot of those. But by sailing around the world, we got to see some very exotic destinations. I'm talking about visiting places you literally can't get to other than on a boat. Beveridge Reef in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that has no land whatsoever. Chagos in the middle of the Indian Ocean has an airport, but you won't be landing there unless you're in the military. Only boats with a permit are allowed in. Even places like Fulanga in Fiji, where their only connection to the outside world was a supply ship, satellite phone, or cruisers. Those places were so special because we're among an extremely small number of people that have ever experienced them. Now, another part of sailing that we really enjoyed, was how it just made us better citizens of the world. We've seen so many different cultures and met with so many different people that it was impossible not to be affected by it. In our lives before we went cruising, it's so easy to just be in your own little bubble. you're only really concerned with, your own small corner of the world, and it's still perhaps too easy to focus on just my immediate surroundings. But now I can think back about everyone we've met and picture them living their lives at the same time I'm living mine, and I realize just how big the world is. After talking to people all over the world, you realize that our fears, our hopes, and our dreams, they really aren't all that different in the end. And finally, by sailing all the way around the world and not falling off the edge, we've become living proof that the Earth is round. Suck it, flat earthers. Yeah, I went there. As we've tried to show in our videos, the sailing life isn't always sunshine and rainbows. There are some parts that just suck. So, let's go over some of the worst parts of sailing around the world. The biggest one is that you are always saying goodbye. As amazing as a cruising community can be, in the back of your mind, everyone knows your time together is temporary. You never know just how much time you're going to have with friends before you part ways. On the plus side, this does mean that you quickly move past the feeling out, getting to know you phase of the relationship, and you're straight into the you're awesome, I'm awesome, let's just be best friends phase. And that lasts for however long you get to spend together. But eventually, routes diverge, people get stuck or move back on land, and you say that last goodbye. Relationships with cruisers isn't the only hard part. Cruising is really hard on the relationship between partners. I think it's really important that cruising is a dream that's shared by both people. The reasons why you want to go cruising don't have to be the same, but if you don't share the dream, being around your partner 24/7 in a small, enclosed space with the stresses of the cruising life can be a combustible mix. The stresses, they add up so fast. It can be anything from the little everyday things like raising the sails, trying to anchor, or worse, coming into a dock, or the big things that you have to work out, like who has the ultimate responsibility for making the multitude of decisions that must be made when you're living on a boat. Someone has to make the go, no-go decision when the weather is good and we get to leave on a passage, or who decides exactly where you want to sail. Good communication is absolutely vital to the survival of your relationship. And I don't use that word survival lightly. Unless you have lived on your boat, or a boat, could be just a boat, your entire life, you have to have left behind a life on land to go cruising. And it sucks being away from family and friends for so long. And we were so lucky to have so many of our family and friends come visit us while we were out cruising, and we often flew back home more often than most of our cruising friends. But still, this much time away is it's tough. We missed family gatherings, weddings, friends with new kids, and lots of other big events. There will be times where you want to get back home for something, and you just can't. You can probably sense a theme through these first items, but let's finally touch on boats. All cruisers have jokingly said, cruising is just working on your boat in exotic locations. I think it's a way to minimize the pain because there is so much truth to that statement. If you missed hearing me talk about it, go back and see how much we spent on boat maintenance every year. It's a lot. Not only is there a never-ending list of boat projects to be worked on, finding parts and supplies, that can be a huge challenge. In most of the world, there's not going to be a huge marine chandlery with everything you need. Shipping parts can take weeks or even months to organize. And it always feels like the part that breaks is the only one you don't have a spare for. You have to become quite good at what I call boat engineering, using whatever you have on the boat or can find locally and just making it work. Most of the times it's not easy. Being on salt water is a terrible environment. And I 100% guarantee you that things will break on your boat at the most inopportune time, even a brand new boat. Now it's probably really difficult to fathom this when you're dreaming about living for a life of adventure on a boat. But burnout, it's very real. One of the best pieces of advice we got before we set sail was from friends who had just finished their circumnavigation. They told us that eventually things will get bad enough that you will want to quit. And when that happens, you need to get off the boat. Find a marina, park the boat, and just get off. Go home if you can, go stay in a hotel, but just get off. Now for us, that was in Southeast Asia. It was our least favorite cruising ground. Things on the boat were breaking left and right. We hit a reef, we got stuck in the mud. We had 2 haul-outs that were gone pretty poorly back to back. Both of us were just so incredibly frustrated, and it was probably the lowest point of our entire circumnavigation. So we checked into a marina, booked last-minute tickets home to spend a few weeks with friends and family, and we got some distance, and it helped. Things didn't magically become perfect when we got back to Starry Horizons, but having some space to breathe, it made all the difference. The last downside I'll mention is the absolute lack of routine. Now, depending on who you are, I suppose this might be in the positive category, but after 4 years, it really started to weigh on us that everywhere we went was somewhere we had to figure out for the first time. How do we clear into the country? Where do you throw away trash? Where is the local market? What food can we find? What boat parts are available? How do you get internet? How do you get fuel? You have to figure out all of these things every time you go somewhere, because when you're circumnavigating, you're very rarely going to return to the same place twice. Now let's wrap up with 2 of the other topics we get asked about most often: pirates and bad weather. I'm not sure if it's because people are hoping to get a glimpse of danger or just a really good story, but they always look a bit disappointed when I tell them that we really didn't experience any issues with pirates or bad weather. We planned our route pretty carefully to do our best to avoid pirates. We didn't go through the Suez, and we stayed away from the Philippines. The worst we had was dealing with all of the fishing boats in Southeast Asia, and just loved to come up close and check us out. Other boats actually did trade with them, but we always worked to just keep our distance. We also did what we could to minimize ourselves as a target. We didn't store things out on deck, and we locked up the boat every night. Now, as for weather, it was always a big concern, but we did our best to mitigate it by doing everything we could to be in the right areas during the right time of year. There are some fairly well-defined hurricane zones, and the times of year you should avoid them. Now, we have a pretty healthy fear of hurricanes after having lived in Houston, so we made sure we were outside of those zones before hurricane season started. We also own a couple copies of Jimmy Cornell books, the World Sailing Routes and his Ocean Atlas pilot charts. He does a really great job of listing what times of years are best for various passages, and looking at the pilot charts gave a much more detailed information about the type of weather that we could actually expect to see. I will add links down in the description below if you're interested in checking those books out, but I would definitely recommend them. One other piece of advice I would give is that patience is absolutely key. We waited in the Seychelles for 2 months to get a good weather window down to Madagascar. Other friends got impatient, left in a less than ideal weather window, and they got beat up so bad they had to divert to a different country. It is so hard to keep waiting when you just want to get moving, but it is absolutely vital. Prepping the general time for your routes will help you avoid most of the trouble, but also being able to download weather information while you're at sea is also incredibly helpful. There were numerous times where we could see some bad weather in our forecasts. Some storms may be unavoidable, but you can still reef well in advance if you know they're coming. I always felt it's better to slow down for a few hours before a storm arrives than to panic when it hits because you have too much sail up. Other times we could see the storms and we were able to divert course, and that just minimized the effect they would have on us. In general, I would say the weather around South Africa was the worst we experienced on our circumnavigation, We had winds over 40 knots multiple times with big waves thanks to the current, and you have very short windows to hop along the coast. It was very stressful, and we really did feel a huge sense of relief to get to Cape Town and just be back in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, I think this is probably a pretty good place to wrap up. I hope you liked this new video style and at least found the topic entertaining. If you're not already a subscriber, you can click over here to follow along or watch another video. We're still working on our list of topics to chat with you about, so if you've got any suggestions, please make sure and leave a comment. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you another day in another bay. Bye, y'all.